Good morning, and welcome to our weekly presser on evaluating the threats and risks the Trump administration is posing to New York City and how we should be responding. From the day that Trump was reelected, this office has been working to protect New Yorkers and help New York City be ready for those threats. And we have consistently urged City Hall to do more to prepare for Trump's threats to and impact on New York City. Unfortunately, the City Hall continues to stick its head in the sand, ignore those threats, and expose New Yorkers to harm on an almost daily basis. We saw this at the end of last week in just a stark contrast between what it looks like when a mayor stands up to protect their residents and when a mayor capitulates and bends the knee to humiliate their residents. Across the river in Newark, Mayor Ras Baraka stood up to ICE and the Trump administration and private prison contractors on behalf of the residents of Newark. First he was out there just to uphold the local laws of Newark. The private for-profit prison funded by ICE in his city refuses to comply with local regulations. And he was out there making clear that as mayor of Newark, his job is to uphold the rule of law and the laws and values in Newark, showing what real leadership looks like, even at risk to himself. And I was proud to be out there. And it was really, I happened to be there when they released him. I was there for a while before, and then when he came out. And I thought what he said was just so powerful. First, not only was he not breaking the law, he was upholding the law. And second, when people said to him, some version of, why are you putting these newcomers over the people of the residents of Newark, he said, let's be clear, everybody who lives in Newark is a resident of Newark. And that's true of New York City as well. Everyone who lives in New York City is a resident of New York City. And the people of New York City, the 8 million of us, 40% are foreign-born, 50% live in mixed-status households, including 1 million children who aren't just residents of New York City, they're the future of New York City. So the fact that on this Friday split screen, our mayor was humiliating himself and our city in front of Donald Trump, pretending to push for resources for New York City, while Trump was making clear that the purpose was just humiliation, it just could not have been more stark. This was also made clear in a letter that Eric Adams sent to me this week. I think it was 2 weeks ago at this press conference, we announced that we were calling on the mayor to recuse himself from decision-making related to the city's sanctuary city laws. And this just seemed pretty straightforward. I mean, given that he had his prosecution dropped in exchange for working with the Trump administration on their repressive immigration policies, let his first deputy mayor or someone not tainted by his deal make decisions there. And he actually did that on this decision of bringing ICE onto Rikers, which just seems straightforward. In that case, he did recuse himself and have Randy Mastro be the individual who would deal with the question of whether ICE should be at Rikers. So it seemed logical to say, okay, recuse yourself in other sanctuary city policies as well. On Friday, we got a response from City Hall that really proves the point. I mean, the mayor denies being beholden to anyone other than the residents of this city, although he doesn't have the guts to clarify who are the residents of this city. And what he did was then listed these 4 lawsuits that the city has joined in ways that are quite preposterous, because I have not heard Eric Adams say one word about any of these 4 things. Now, I don't listen to every word he says, so maybe there's one out there, but so far as I know, even though we did force the law department into court by getting the governor involved and threatening to give me the authority to sue, and thankfully the law department is in court. If you only listen to Eric Adams, you would not know that Elon Musk stole $80 million from New York and that we are fighting to get it back. You certainly wouldn't know that New York City did an amicus in the congestion pricing lawsuit. That's another area where we are being dangled on a string, needlessly tortured by the Trump administration, in a case that is very likely to be dismissed. The MTA is standing up, the governor is standing up. I have not heard the mayor say one word about this. It's certainly not a case where he or the Adams administration is leading. And the same is true on these other cases where we're not a lead plaintiff. We have not gone into court. The Adams administration has meekly joined some of these efforts. And strangely, the letter doesn't even mention the recent amicus brief that the law department filed with local governments across the country defending birthright citizenship. Tomorrow, on May 15th, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case challenging the Trump's unconstitutional, quite absurd attempt, honestly, to end birthright citizenship per the 14th Amendment. Considering that generations of New Yorkers came through Ellis Island and would not have citizenship today if it weren't for birthright citizenship, including many of our families, it's quite remarkable that they did not even list that amicus brief in this tiny list of lawsuits that they joined or were forced to join. If we had a mayor more like Ras Baraka, willing to stand up and fight for New Yorkers, or a mayor who would do what we have been calling for since the first week, to look honestly at the fiscal and economic implications and prepare to protect New Yorkers from the cuts that are coming, we would be on much firmer financial footing. We would then have a mayor that was standing up to protect New Yorkers instead of only protecting himself. So with that, we will turn to our analysis of the threats of the reconciliation budget, the debate around budget reconciliation that is traveling through Congress right now. We're still learning the details on what cuts each committee has ordered, and details are still in negotiation through the week. But look, House Speaker Mike Johnson has set Memorial Day as the target deadline for a vote. But here's what we know. The bill as it stands is in lockstep with the Trump administration's goal to dramatically cut services that American families rely on in red states and blue, in cities and suburbs and exurbs and rural areas, and vastly undermine the federal government's ability to deliver on the services that American families and New York families count on, all in order to deliver enormous tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and wreak havoc with the programs that working class Americans rely on. It would be disastrous for families across the city and for New York City's economy, causing millions to lose health insurance and go hungry, and for tens of thousands of families who will lose daycare and see housing costs skyrocket. I'm going to focus on Medicaid and SNAP today, but I'll just flag that it appears the bill also will repeal sections of the Clean Air Act governing air pollution and emission standards, cut clean energy tax credits for low-income families, eliminate residential solar tax credits, and really cut back the low-income home energy assistance program, which we'll have more analysis of in another week or two. Supports fossil fuel expansion by allowing companies to get expedited approvals for natural gas, oil, and hydrogen pipelines, and even preempts states from regulating artificial intelligence for 10 years in an effort apparently to let this small handful of companies, some of whom accompanied Trump to Saudi Arabia yesterday, erode privacy rights, ignore ethical concerns, and dominate the field of AI before any meaningful regulation can be put in place. This is a situation where states need to be able to regulate if the federal government is not going to, and a federal preemption is a very frightening concept. Okay, let me move to the Medicaid cuts. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the reconciliation bill would cut Medicaid by at least $715 billion over the next 10 years and result in 816 million Americans losing health care by establishing work requirements. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. By penalizing states like New York that use the Medicaid infrastructure to provide health insurance funded only by the state for folks who are undocumented, And this morning we learned that you're already seeing the impacts of this. Governor Gavin Newsom of California is expected to make significant cuts to Medicaid funding for undocumented residents of California, essentially yielding to Trump administration pressure to cut insurance for millions of undocumented people. We did a study here in 2022 looking at the Coverage for All proposal, which then subsequently passed in Albany. Expanded coverage for undocumented New Yorkers saves New York State money and helps the economy thrive. We found that the state would save $649 million from preventing premature deaths, see $22 million in increased labor productivity, $20 million in lower out-of-pocket costs, and $19 million in reduced uncompensated care by expanding coverage with state funding. And the idea that now, because of Trump and MAGA Republicans' threats, that's going to be rolled back in California by a Democratic governor is really terrifying. This is a critical moment to make sure that we are providing healthcare coverage for everyone and finding innovative and creative ways to do it. This is at least a case where states should be on the offensive and should sue and say, if we're not using federal dollars, we shouldn't have other federal dollars cut, and at least get that litigated and in court before choosing to cut people off from healthcare, who are, again, many of those families who I just described, including tons of young people, in this case in California, but obviously there are many, many here. Expanding coverage for all is both a moral and a fiscal imperative. Other things in the bill would impose co-pays and free the new provider taxes. New York State's effort to for this managed care organization, or MCO tax, is already threatening to be eliminated. That's something we were counting on a couple of $1 billion for to fund healthcare expansion in New York State that is put at further risk by this bill. Prohibiting Medicaid from funding gender-affirming care, ending reimbursements for community health providers that provide family planning and abortion services. Really a catastrophic set of things that will have devastating impact on Americans. Let's talk a little more about what those would be in New York. 35% of New Yorkers across the state get health care through Medicaid. That's one of the highest shares of any state in the country. Medicaid alone constitutes 43% of the state budget. In New York City, 4 million people are enrolled in Medicaid. An additional 1 million are on the New York State Essential Plan for people that are not eligible for Medicaid, but that still get 100% coverage with no copays. Together, that's nearly 60% of the city's population. Medicaid funds nearly half, 47% of all New York births, and 55% of the babies born in New York City each year are born to parents covered by Medicaid. So that's what's at risk here. We're actually putting out our monthly economic spotlight today, which looks at job quality in New York City, because what we see there is the areas of growth in jobs in New York are in, unfortunately, jobs that don't pay enough to live in this expensive city, and quite often don't include decent employer-provided health care. So only 65% of New York City's workers have employer-sponsored health insurance through their job. And this goes back to the work requirements. So roughly 20% of employed workers are on Medicaid. And among those jobs that don't meet the standards of being what we identify as good jobs in our report today, Medicaid participation climbed from 27% to 33% from 2017 to 2023, and essential plan growth also grew considerably. We are allowing employers to make jobs worse and rely on federal government and state government provided health insurance, even as federal government and state government health insurance are now threatening to be eroded. So the consequences of allowing employers to create bad jobs and then simultaneously, in order to give their owners big tax breaks, savaging the healthcare funding poses a real double whammy risk. It's also worth noting that nationally, 2/3 of Medicaid recipients are working, and that most of them who aren't working would likely qualify for exemptions. So putting work requirements on Medicaid is not going to move people into the labor market. 2/3 of them are already in the labor market. It's just going to result in unnecessary disenrollments and make it harder for people to access the health care that they urgently need. Yeah, I mean, what does this all mean in the aggregate? Like, the choices New York will face are all devastating. Cut rates, reduce eligibility or benefits, increase local contributions, or more likely all of the above. Community hospitals, elder care providers, and foster care agencies and drug treatment programs could all be forced to close or reduce services. Undocumented kids and older New Yorkers likely to lose coverage, and kids with disabilities will likely lose access to the services that help them learn in our schools, many of which are funded through Medicaid. Moving on now to SNAP. The proposed reconciliation bill cuts $230 billion in federal funding by forcing states to cover between 5 and 25% of the cost of SNAP. The bill blocks the USDA's discretion to increase monthly benefits in line with food prices, even if grocery prices are rising faster than inflation. And it would force states into tough budget decisions about where to cut or reduce eligibility, deflecting that responsibility from the federal government. And here's what that means in New York. In 2024, New York State administered $7.3 billion in SNAP benefits, and New York City's Department of Social Services issued $5 billion. Nearly 3 million New Yorkers received SNAP benefits, representing 1.7 million families. In New York City, it's 1.8 million New York City residents who receive SNAP, including 560,000 children. Older adults represent 30% of total SNAP residents in New York City. And I think it's worth noting that the federal proposal extends the work requirement from 60 to 65. So you have many people who are older, who expected to be able to retire, who have retired, who would now face work requirements for Medicaid. In New York, broadly, cost sharing would add somewhere between $366 million and $1.8 billion in additional costs just for fiscal year 26. And all these things are really stacking up. Remember, we just learned that, for example, the state government is sticking New York City with a nearly $350 million cost for child care, or that child care is going to go away, but the state is not preparing, and the city is woefully not preparing for these additional cuts that could be coming from SNAP. New York State will likely need to cover 25%, which would amount to somewhere near $1.8 billion in the state budget. And if passed down to New York City, as it has been in the past, could be a $1.25 billion impact on the city's budget. And just as a reminder, the Adams administration has done nothing to put money in the general reserves to prepare for the risks of Trump budget cuts. These are the housing ones we talked about last week, or the AmeriCorps ones we talked about last week, to after-school programs, and nothing to put any more in the rainy day fund to deal with the risk of revenue reductions as a result of an economic downturn likely to come from the tariffs. These cost shifts, combined with Medicaid cuts and other federal reductions, will implicate every other part of city and state spending, from public safety to infrastructure to housing to education to childcare. And the Adams administration continues to acknowledge reality, to bury its head in the sand, and to refuse to prepare for the realities that we face that is failing to protect New Yorkers. Finally, a few other threats that we're monitoring. Included in the House Ways and Means bill is a nonprofit killer, language that would grant the Treasury Secretary broad, unchecked power to revoke the tax-exempt status of nonprofit organizations. The language in this bill would give the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, sole authority to designate any nonprofit as a terrorist-supporting organization without providing any justification, and to suspend their tax-exempt status with no due process. And they're showing that they're quite willing to do it. So that legislation must not be allowed to move forward. This just continues the Trump administration's effort to punish its political opponents and silence any dissent from institutions ranging from, Harvard to nonprofit organizations just serving immigrant New Yorkers, a very real creeping authoritarian threat. So we will keep monitoring those federal attacks on the nonprofit sector, like they did here on the Vera Institute, like they did on CPC, on Chinese American Planning Council, and this legislation would enable them to do on many others. There's also some increasing risks to student debt. Congressional Republicans are working toward an overhaul of the student loan program and resuming involuntary collection. The Education and Workforce Committee have passed their plan to overhaul federal aid and repayment programs. And while delinquencies are increasing, Republicans are proposing to eliminate income-driven loan repayment options, limit the Department of Education's regulatory authority, limit Pell Grant eligibility for part-time students, many of whom are working in full-time jobs. Week before last, I had the opportunity to meet a young woman, Claire Bleiler. Claire's somebody who came here and went to Hunter, got federal loans and was paying them after she graduated, got a job in New York City, working hard, struggling, but making it, was paying, had put her federal student loans on an auto payment from her bank. When the student loan payment were put on pause during the pandemic, that paused her payments. The federal government then, in the Trump administration, ended the moratorium, but her bank did not resume her automatic payments. And before she knew it, she's tens of thousands of dollars in debt, facing jacked up fees and predatory lending risks, does not have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau there to help her, and now the reconciliation bill threatens to erode the possibility of students like Claire and millions of others to get the education they deserve in a way that does not make them burdened by debt for the rest of their lives. And many of those people are here in New York City. So that is, with gratitude to our budget analysis team and our whole policy team, this week's presentation on threats, and be glad to take any questions.
Comptroller, do you believe there should be any so-called reforms to Medicaid, especially at the state level, or do you like to leave it as is?
Well, I mean, there's always ways. I mean, I think you should be looking at every system every year. Of course, we know, there are examples of fraud in the system, and you always want to be doing more to identify and root out fraud. But that's a tailored effort. That's looking at who are the providers that are bilking the system. So I'm open to efforts that continue to, I think Tom DiNapoli's done a good job. There's a Medicaid investigator. Let's keep looking for the places where people are taking advantage of the state. But this is just a clear cutting.
You don't have any inkling or indication that Governor Hochul in Albany will respond to these Medicaid changes in the same way that Governor Newsom has?
Certainly no indication of that. I mean, it was very saddened to see what Governor Newsom said this morning. I mean, this really is a moment when whether people kind of stand up strong and fight for values or just start in advance to capitulate and yield, it really matters. Look, states have tough decisions to make. I have proposed that New York City should create an independent authority alongside H&H, let's call it, separate from H&H, but alongside, so that abortions, contraception, gender-affirming care continue to be provided, funded as they are now, solely with city, state, and private dollars, but put in an independent authority so that at H&H, which is currently providing those services but not with federal dollars, wouldn't be providing them anymore. H&H would be getting the federal dollars, about $1 billion of its $4 billion budget, providing other services. The independent city authority is providing abortions, contraception, gender-affirming care. And then if they try to cut our Medicaid funding to H&H anyway by saying, well, your city is providing those services, let's go to court and take it there and say, we're not using federal money. The institution that gets the federal money isn't even doing it, and force them to win in court. But to do it this way, where you yield in advance before the bill is even passed, much less before you have fought or litigated, is not just shameful, it's short-sighted. It will do damage to California in its economy and its employers' need for jobs, and of course in families and kids who are relying on that care. So I very much hope New York will continue to provide it. We've actually pushed for some, one other thing that I've talked about in the past is New York City has this program, NYC Care, which is a kind of preventive care support for undocumented families. It only applies right now in H&H facilities itself. It doesn't apply in federally qualified health centers or FQHCs. But we estimate that we could do enormous good by providing that care in FQHCs. This is a time when cities and states can step up and show how we're going to protect people who are being made vulnerable by what Trump is doing. But again, what the Adams administration is doing is not only not looking to do more protection, but putting its head in the sand and failing even to put money in reserves to deal with cuts that seem very likely. Thank you. All right. Thanks very much, Chloe. Thanks very much, Krista and Sam and Lara and everybody who worked on this report. We'll be back here next week. I guess I'll just say to folks who are kind of listening online, if there's an area of the budget or of things that Trump is doing that you want to understand the impacts on New York City of, I mentioned we're looking at that LIHEAP program, Low Income Housing Energy Assistance Program. Last week we did AmeriCorps. We've looked at housing. If you've got something, this week we did food stamps and Medicaid. If you've got something that you're concerned about, let us know. We'll put our Crackerjack team on taking a look both at its impact on New York City's budget, on its economy, and on New Yorkers. Thank you very much.